Judge Sullivan also presided over the trial against Latarsha Sanders, and there's a very interesting update that came out recently. Back in February 2018, Latarsha Sanders took the lives of her two young sons, 8-year-old Marlon and 5-year-old La'Son. At her trial, there was not a question about who had done this. Instead, the question was around her criminal responsibility. There was no documented mental health history for Latarsha prior to February 2018, but there was some evidence of her behavior changing recently. She had become consumed with conspiracy theories about the Illuminati. She thought that people were trying to poison her children, and she made statements that she felt she was being instructed by bad people. Her defense attorney testified that she was grossly psychotic and she lacked the capacity to understand the criminality of her actions or conform her behavior to the law. While Sanders was waiting on her trial, she spent years being evaluated and treated in prison and a state psychiatric hospital. There were thousands of pages of records documenting paranoia, delusions, hallucinations, and multiple psychiatric diagnoses. Those records included clinicians questioning schizophrenia spectrum disorders, a diagnosis of schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorders, an assessment that her presentation was consistent with paranoid schizophrenia that had gone undetected and untreated for decades, and eventually she received a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder. Her defense attorney tried to introduce these records during her 2022 trial, but this is where Judge Sullivan comes in. He did not allow them into evidence unless the prosecution first opened the door during cross-examination, which never happened, so those records were not admitted in trial and they were never handed over to the jury. Sanders was convicted by that jury, and she was sentenced to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. But then we fast forward to August 6, 2026. The Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court threw out those convictions unanimously and ordered a new trial. The court specifically found that Judge Sullivan's decision to exclude these psychiatric records was wrong and prejudiced Sanders' defense. The justices said excluding them impermissibly stripped her sole defense of the medical foundation supporting it, and that wasn't the only issue that they addressed. During the prosecutor's closing arguments, they suggested that because Law and Order SVU happened to be playing on the television when police were at Sanders' home, that maybe she had gotten ideas from episodes involving children and voodoo rituals. The Supreme Judicial Court said that argument was improper. There was no evidence that Sanders had watched those episodes, no evidence she had copied any storyline, and no evidence connecting what happened to the television show that happened to be playing later. The DA's office has said that they are reviewing this ruling and deciding their next steps. So far, a new trial date has not been set. I believe in every defendant getting a fair trial, regardless of the crime, so I can't disagree with this decision. However, I don't personally feel that this case and this ruling can be used to make any comparisons to the Lindsay Clancy trial. It is the same judge, but we have heard so much evidence, we have seen so many documents, and it doesn't appear that Judge Sullivan has not allowed anything in that would compare to what happened in this case. But that is just my outlook on it. Let me know yours. Again, I believe every defendant deserves a fair trial, so I'll keep you updated on what happens with Latarsha's case, but most importantly, rest in peace to 8-year-old Edson Marlon Brito and 5-year-old La'Son Brito.